Hi folks. I thought, despite the fact that I no longer own a P6, well, I currently don't. I think that's the best phrase because I do intend to own one again. Um, I'd like to go through some of my experiences on the common problems that I've found with Rover P6s. Now, this is not an exhaustible list. They are at least 46 years old. Okay, the youngest are 46. Oh no, 45 years old, 1977 registration. So there could be a number of issues depending on how that model is being looked after and what sort of condition it's currently in. A lot of P6s are still in a rather sorry state, unfortunately, because of the fact that they are just seen and have been seen for many years as a big, they're not that big, but in classic car terms, they are a big old barge, old man's pipes and slippers barge. They don't attract the same following as Jaguars, Jaguar XJs. They're in a different class, a different bracket class. To be honest with you, they're not an out and out luxury barge. They are a very luxury high middle class man's car. Poor man's Rolls is the best description of that particular car. But I'd just like to go through a few things that really, if you are looking for a P6, these are the things that you do need to know about at this age. I think I've got some pictures that I can actually relate to. Let's have a look. Now, I've got quite a few pictures. Now, I'm going to talk about this. Okay, now this isn't the best of pictures. Oh, it's not very good at all. You can barely see that. Basically here you've got two inboard discs and you've got a diff. Yeah, that is not a good picture. I can't really show you anything there. But basically, the brake discs and the calipers are at an age, if they have not been looked at, they will need to be looked at. And getting access to the pads is a bit difficult. And taking off the calipers certainly much so. You will need to take the half shafts out, and that is a lot of fiddling. It's not a job that I got round to, but it was a job that would have been coming up if I had kept the car. It is a job that's put off because of the access. It isn't the greatest, but it's not the worst thing in the world compared to what some people say. These cars get a very bad rep because of that, but there were plenty of advice and instructions about how people do that. The top tip I will have for you, despite the fact I've not done this job, is the caliper wind back tool is not necessarily a tool that you need to do the job. It is a frustrating tool to use. It is a very slow tool, winding the calipers back. And if you go into eBay, type Rover P6 caliper wind back tool, you'll get the tool. I'm not sure how much they are actually these days. Just see if the brakes are being changed as well, because they will be at an age where they'll need changing. The servos, the brake servo, the brake master servo seals, they can go. The servo seals can certainly go. Now, this is I'll show you before photo. This is more accurate. Now, these cars have one inherent issue that has been happening for many years in the scene, and that is you've got this De Dion rear axle. So essentially it is a semi-independent suspension. So you've got your coil springs there with your upper arms there, and you've got that hooking to this elbow piece, which is basically part of the hub where your drive shafts go through. You've got obviously a top link there. I believe you can get this brand new if you're very lucky. You get new springs, easy enough, uprated heavy duty springs, some Wins or MGBD parts. There's two suppliers, Wins International, which I believe is a business owned by a man called Jeff, who's very, very knowledgeable on these cars. I think he's been trying to sell the business for many years, but nobody wants it, and I think I can imagine why. It's a very specific area, and I don't think it apparently might not be as profitable for whatever reason. But he has a massive stock of spares. I'd advise you look at him, and if you go to him with a problem, he will find a solution, trust me. Same with MGBD Parts, Mark Gray. That is a name associated with P6s quite a bit. What he doesn't know doesn't bear thinking about, to be honest with you. He knows these cars inside out, so he supplies a lot of parts as well, and really good parts, so think about that. But anyway, this is the DNAT saw. Essentially, it's a sliding tube, so when you go round a corner, this tube with oil, the tube will basically go where gravity goes. It will go to the side which starts leaning. So if you're turning right around a roundabout, the tube will start going that way. The oil will start going that way, and it will force the tube this way, and the tube puts weight on this side of the car to keep this wheel in contact with the road. That is the essential principle. It is a slightly more complicated than that, but it really isn't too much. But there is an issue with these rear hubs, as you can start to see here. They start to corrode where the bolt goes through the top link, and especially where the bottom arm, I can't show you because I haven't got a picture of it, where the bottom arm goes through the hub. Now they can actually rot off. I'll just see if I can actually Google it. They rot off to a point where they literally they can snap off and dig into the road if you're driving it, and they often do give up on the road. And it's a very common problem. Some people have been lucky enough to find their cars sagged on the driveway with little consequence, and I believe there's quite a few here. Now that's the visual issue there, but what can happen is that's pretty bad, and that's how rotten they can get. The metal here can look okay at a glance, like mine looked okay, but unless you get this elbow, the hub and the not the arm, the elbow itself, which is part of the hub, unless you take that off and have it taken to somebody who can sandblast it, you can then see what sort of metal is left. I mean, that's a good one, and that's one that's snapped. You do need to be very wary of that. There are lots of second-hand ones out there, but you really don't know how good they are. And mine might look good. They certainly look good after I'd done a bit of rust converting, which is, again, if you look at this picture here, put some of the rust converter on, as you can see the blue. Oh, this is the other side, but the other side was no. But see, that looks much better, doesn't it? It's very deceiving, isn't it? It looks fantastic, but it looked like the other side before with surface rust and all that. Very, very deceptive, and it is something you really, really must be aware of, because if you don't want it snapping on the motorway. But there is a thing. If you have it sandblasted and there is metal loss, a good welder will be able to plate a reinforcing plate to strengthen around there and around there, and that's what you want, and that will save that elbow for many, many more years, maybe indefinitely in some cases if it's done well. So that is a big problem that you need to be aware of. In terms of the engines, I mean, this is something I had to do. Now, I can't really refer to the 4-cylinder. I'm going to refer to the 4-cylinder versions because this is the only car I've got experience with. This is a stabilising mount bar at the front of the engine. It basically, you've got the two mounts either side of the engine. You've got this as a steady mount because the gearbox has got a rear mount at the back, which is rubber, and that can sometimes go. I don't think I've got a picture of that, but that's something else I'll come to. But look at the rubbers there. They are absolutely perished. And what can happen is the engine can actually drop to the point, and this goes for the other two engine mountings. They're very hard to get hold of, but I've seen a solution, Matt of Furious Driving, if you watch his channel, God, you should. He's actually replaced one of his engine mounts with hockey pucks, and he's just drilled a hole through where the bolt goes through. That's a very good solution because you just can't get brand new ones or even decent second-hand ones without the same issue. When the engine mounts or the stabilizer bar collapses, the front pulley at the bottom, and I'll show you a picture. When the pulley drops, it actually gets quite low. I don't think this is the best picture, but anyway, that pulley gets really low to that cross member, and it can start chafing it, and you'll soon know because you'll start hearing it. Mine was okay, but this is where the stabilizer bar is in that picture. Okay, it's pretty easy to take off. Getting the bottom one is a bit of a faff, ideally, and getting the new one on with tight bushes is a tricky job. You will need to jack up the engine a little bit, I think, but that wasn't too bad a job, and it was quite important to actually do. Water pumps are easy, but you have to be aware that the bolts holding the water pump to the block, it's the water pump housing is aluminium, but they go into a cast iron block. Steel bolt going through aluminium going into cast iron, you get the idea of why that might be tricky. Obviously different metals, and there will be some corrosion, and they can snap, so you have to use lots of WD-40, maybe a blowgun, maybe some heat. That will be ideal for that job. Okay. Again, belts, it's easy. If you want to adjust the fan belt, that bolt there, just slide it across. It basically pivots the whole alternator bracket to tighten that belt. It's easy enough done. You want about 1 millimeter of deflection, no more really, with your thumb between the alternator and the water pump there. So you put your finger down there. No real issues anywhere else, to be honest with you. I'll just take you through. Oh yes, this is something you need to be aware of as well. Brake master cylinder, when I took it open, check that you haven't got too much rubbish in there, because yeah, your brake fluid is going to get dirty. And clean the filter. Look at that mess, it's disgusting. So have a look in there if you get your servo, well, if you're disturbing the brake system, I would say. Now, overall with these engines, the only thing that to be aware of, they have for many years, they enjoy burning the exhaust valve at the back, mainly because it's the furthest away from, well, basically by the time the coolant's got to the back, it's quite warm, so it is naturally a more warmer place to be. As far as that part of the engine is concerned, so there isn't as much cooling going on at the back as there is at the front, so they can burn their valves. It's not the end of the world. You know, new valve, grind the valve in, and you're away again, but it can happen, and you will lose fourth cylinder. Washer motors, they can go quite a bit. As far as I know, that was an aftermarket replacement. The original Trico ones are very, very expensive. They tend to go anyway. They're not particularly great and all powerful, but you can get ones from Land Rovers, I believe. They've got the same sort of original Trico pumps, but if you don't really care about the original look, just go for an aftermarket one like that. It's absolutely fine. Obviously I did have to change the fuel pump. The diaphragm had split. That will result in a non-start, and you can tell because I put a filter here, and I think that is advisable, because if you do not have a filter here with the original fuel tank, it's a steel fuel tank, there will be odd deposits around after 40 years. There is a filter gauze in here, but it won't necessarily pick it up completely, so I would have one of these. When I hadn't got this fitted, this float valve used to consistently overflow with fuel, because the float valve would jam, and obviously it'd stick open and it would just gush fuel down the heat shield. That is not ideal by that exhaust, and I know it would happen straight away. I'll be driving along and I can instantly smell petrol. If you've got the same symptoms, it's overflowing. And it's because things are getting jammed in the valve. It needs cleaning. Put a filter on that line. This is an aftermarket hose, by the way, not the original, so I could put it on. That is a must, and it's a must to change it every couple of years. They're not expensive, and they are a must, to be honest. Setting up the timing is pretty easy. As I say, you've got the time marks down there. They're pretty easy. There's a pointer down there. Get your strobe gun and adjust that for what fuel you want. Again, decide what fuel you want, as I said in the previous. Super unleaded or unleaded. Decide. And then you adjust the ignition to basically what it should be. If you go for super unleaded fuel and you decide to do the timing on that, you'll probably get an advancement of 8 degrees to 10 degrees. Okay, every engine is different, but mine used to run very nicely on 8 degrees, maybe 9 degrees with super unleaded. But if I actually timed it up then, and then I put some standard fuel in, it would run very poorly, because obviously you've timed it up and now it's quite advanced for the fuel, and obviously standard fuel detonates a little bit quicker than super unleaded. It's a bit more volatile as such, and it's more prone to pre-detonation. That's why super unleaded is much more appropriate for classic cars. Plus you've got the E10 thing now. Since I sold this car, we've now got the E10 issue. I really don't want the thought of E10 sitting in that tank. Look, you're most likely going to buy one of these as a classic, you know, as a car you're occasionally going to drive. You're not going to drive it regularly. I think the fuel prices have put a lot of people off. This car is going to be sitting maybe for weeks on end without being used. Don't put E10 in, because as soon as it sits, the ethanol separates from the water in the tank, and that's when you have corrosion issues. Obviously, the P6 is great in the respect because the fuel pipes that go from the rear of the car to the fuel tap here, it's a nylon fuel hose, which they're actually quite durable. To be honest, I've never known one to actually fail as such, so that is an advantage. No steel lines. Carburetor is easy to tune. Just get a decent tuning kit, or one of those magic spark plugs where you can see the flame. I can't remember what they were called now. They're quite easy. Other thing, steering box. There is an adjustment on it, but it's only to adjust backlash. To be honest with you, as long as you change the oil every few years, I find they gum up if they're not changed. The steering idler arm, below it you've got the steering line here, with the track rods that you can't really see. They can sometimes cause a knocking sound from the front suspension. It's not your ball joints, it could be your track rods. Check for movement. I will show you the front suspension because that is the next thing I'm going to talk about now. I am going to... Oh, is this a good picture? No, it's not. It's too blooming dark. Well done, Andrew. Oh, my photography is really good. Other thing, obviously, this is the front suspension. You've got the top arm that goes to the spring. Breaking that ball joint off is quite difficult, so you're going to need a good splitter for that to get on top of that and fork it off. Luckily, as you can see, it's actually budged. And I'll put a new ball joint on because the originals were shot. Shock absorbers, they'll be all tied by now. If they're the originals, they will be tied regardless of mileage. Age is more of a thing. Again, top ball joint, it's easy enough. Break the taper, as I've said in the previous video. You've got, I think, 716 bolts. Get a 716 spanner, crack it off, get a chisel, bang bang bang, and it will come out. It will come out very, very easily. Yeah, that's what they can get like when they... It's all mushy. It's terrible. There wasn't actually anything wrong with the ball joint. It had just gone that way. There's one here. Right, front electrics. Okay, the side lights that go here, they're very expensive second-hand. They are made brand new. There's a company that's making them, but if you want to pay 150 quid, if you want to pay NOS, for a NOS one, you know, you're looking at 250 or something like that. Stupid money. It's unjustifiable, to be honest with you. But these body connectors can sometimes fail, so check them out. They can get a bit fragile, and you need new body connectors putting on. You don't need a crimp. You don't need a body connector tool. I actually did mine by using another crimper, but yeah, that's how I did mine. Check your seals. Check your seals, okay? make sure you check all the way down. Should be solid like that, but a lot of them aren't. It can be expensive. That's where P6s have been left many years. If you've got a rattling noise, make sure you check that this heat shield, there's 2 bolts that hold it on. Make sure there's no cracks where they are, because mine was starting to crack. As you can see, I've got it really nice and clean. I was so pleased with the way that came up. I sort of sorted the alternator out, cleaned that up a little bit as well. That looks fantastic, doesn't it? It's my paintwork isn't the finest. My paintwork was nowhere near as good as it is now. Clean that breather filter ever so often. Make sure this vacuum pipe hasn't got a hole in it. Make sure you are getting correct advance, otherwise it won't run properly. Change this flame trap, the breather filter. Okay, it is a non-return. Make sure that you can breathe through it, but it shouldn't be blocked. You can wash these out in petrol. That is another idea if you want to save a few pounds. Exhausts, stainless steel systems are available now for the car. Okay, and I would advise going to Wins for that. Leather seats, you will not get leather seats that look like these. Most of them are dried, cracked, unless you've bought a really top-notch car. I spent a lot of time on this interior. I think the interior is to die for. I really do miss the car in terms of the interior. If the paint looked as good as the interior, I would never have got rid of it, to be honest. But that's a pretty luxurious interior. You won't get that on a 2004 cylinder. You'd be lucky to get the teardrop headrests. These are V8 headrests, and those headrests certainly came off a V8 as well. In fact, the whole interior did. In terms of interior, okay, there's very little to go wrong. Obviously, you might get a modern radio and put that in. Choke cables are easy to replace. You just feed them through the plastic outer ferrule. Fuel reserve tap. They very rarely work. I've found they can be gummed up after many years, because obviously there's 2 lines. You've got the main line and then the reserve line going from the tank. This takes fuel, basically it opens the tap, the fuel tap on the side of the engine bay. That tap can leak. There's an O-ring seal that you'll need to replace. It's ethanol resistant. It's easy to do. There's just a Phillips screw. Take the tap out, the actual arm, put a new O-ring in, and you're done. That's sometimes why the reserve tap doesn't work. Secondly, they just can be gummed up from use, because the reserve pipe takes the fuel from a lower part of the tank, and as you can expect, for many years that may not be possible. The tap did work for me, but I think the fuel gauge was way off. I think the fuel gauge was a little bit optimistic for what was in the tank, as they can all be for some reason. This clock never, you just need to keep adjusting that, because it's not a quartz clock, it's a mechanical adjustable clock. I love the ticking sound. It's very peaceful. Listen to that ticking sound, very much like back in the 60s, 70s. Speedo's beautiful, and they very rarely fail, but there's a lot of electrics behind it, so don't confuse the wires if you ever have to take that off. Take a few photos, for instance. Dashboards can crack. Mine did, but they're okay. They're not too bad. Windscreen wipers, the correct stainless steel wipers, are quite expensive. You can get refills where you can actually get a new blade and fit it on. It's quite easy to do. Gear linkage, right. Borg Warner 35, very common gearbox in a lot of British cars, with an automatic gearbox at the time. It is a slush box. It doesn't like staying in low gears. It wants to get to third gear as quickly as possible. They really just don't hold on to the revs at all, which is a normal characteristic of the box. They do clunk when you put it in drive. That's normal. The gear lever had a slight bit of play in the linkage, but it wasn't too bad, to be honest with you. It certainly wasn't, actually. It was a really nice gearbox. I don't know how many miles it done, but I think it was more on the low mileage side. With the gearbox, I will say there is a bush at the rear, and you have to check that it hasn't gone soft. Unfortunately, you will have to drop the gearbox to change that bush. That bush will allow the gearbox to move a little bit too much, and there is a common issue on the automatics where the flexi plate, the flywheel on a manual, the flexi plate, it will actually crack and it won't start, it won't drive, it will lose all drive. That is a problem on the automatics, and it still happens today, and it's because the gearbox mounting has actually flexed too much. So change that before it takes out the flexi plate. You don't want to be buying both. But they will run quite nicely. Don't use anything like, I think it's Dextron, don't use anything like that. There are quite a few oils out there that are applicable to the gearbox. Was it Dextron or was it Mercon? I think it's Dextron. Don't go for anything with Dextron in it. It destroys the clutch bands. Unless it's been rebuilt, which it may be a bit more robust, but you don't want to take the risk on that. There's very little to go wrong with the gearbox. The Borg Warner 35 has a rod linkage, okay, whereas the Borg Warner 65 fitted to later cars after 1973, they have a cable linkage. Not as much to go on there. The only thing that never worked in my gearbox is the starter inhibitor switch. I bypassed it because they're very difficult to adjust, and getting decent quality replacements is difficult. A lot of the aftermarket ones don't work properly. You have to go for the genuine original ones if they come up. But I would suggest bypassing it. It doesn't matter as long as the car starts. You're not going to start it in drive. Who starts an automatic in drive unless they're an idiot? In that case, don't own a classic car. Always start it in park or neutral. So really, that is it. There are a couple of things that I've probably forgotten. There are a numerous amount of things, but these are the main things that I really came across in my ownership. I didn't really mess with the car too much in terms of suspension, apart from the front ball joints. I actually didn't touch the suspension, so there's a lot more experience that other people can give, but I thought I would just share a little bit of knowledge about the common issues on that I faced on a P6. So I hope that really helps you. I will see you soon in another video. Hopefully people are watching and haven't been bored to death. If you don't like these videos, don't watch them. If you do, thumbs up and subscribe, because I do need a few more subscribers. It will motivate me to keep going and make more informative videos, and not just me sitting at my desk looking at my laptop. There's only a couple of videos that I wanted to do like this. It will be mainly practical, working on the car stuff, getting my hands dirty, and that's me. I will see you very soon. Bye all.